Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming to this presentation today, which is entitled Risk, Resilience, and the Renaissance of Play. My name is Dr. Michelle Stone. I'm an assistant professor here in the School of Health and Human Performance at Dalhousie University, and I'm also a research scholar with the Healthy Populations Institute, for which you can see our lovely banner right here, one of the organizations in which all of our research is featured. Before we start, I would really like to acknowledge our funders for which this event could not be possible. So Research Nova Scotia and also the Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation through their Picayune Visiting Scholar Series program. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Lorene Raymond, who is the director of our School of Health and Human Performance, and also Dr. Sarah Kirk, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, as they worked with me to prepare the application that was able to get us funding from the DMRF to bring our featured speaker here, Dr. Mariana Brussoni, here today, who we'll introduce in a moment. I'd also notably like to express a huge thank you to Recreation Nova Scotia, Crystal Watson here and her team for sponsoring our event. We will be having a social event from 6 to 7 p.m. With some food, and so please stay for that, as it will be a chance to mingle and also enjoy some free food. So thanks to Recreation Nova Scotia for their generous support. So we were fortunate to bring our featured speaker, Dr. Mariana Brussoni, here today, as I mentioned, through the Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation's Picayune Visiting Scholar Program and the generous support from the Picayune family. The application was based around the premise of risky outdoor play being essential to establishing healthier, happier, and more resilient communities. And the Picayune Visiting Scholar Program serves to bring internationally respected scholars recognized for having made significant contributions to the advancement of their respective fields to Dalhousie University. So today we are pleased to have Joanne Bath. She's the Director of Development and Interim Co-CEO for the Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation, here with us today to say a few words about the organization and the intent of the Picayune Visiting Scholar Program. So Joanne, thank you very much for being here, and I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation, or as we like to call it, DMRF. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Joanne Bath, and I proudly work at the DMRF, and I've been there for about 7 years. At DMRF, we cultivate, raise, and steward funds to support the incredible health research taking place at Dalhousie. And not a day goes by where I'm not impressed by the caliber of research happening right here in our own backyard. It's actually pretty impressive. It's groundbreaking and collaborative with local and global impacts. That's why DMRF exists, to support the research priorities that are impacting the health and wellness of our community, and we support only research at Dalhousie in the faculties of dentistry, health, and medicine. We all know without good health, quality of life is altered and life expectancy shortened. Health research has the power to change negative outcomes into positive ones. That's the business we're in. And whether it's through prevention, faster diagnosis, better and more personalized treatments, and ultimately cures, research is the key to improved health and life. I'm fortunate to work with our exceptional health researchers. It's an honor for me, and I'm also honored to know our donors. It's a privilege for me to cultivate philanthropic relationships in the community that bolster our research endeavors. Tonight's event is proof of that. Each year, thanks to an endowed gift from the Picayune family who live in Palm Springs, lucky Picayunes, he practiced here as a doctor many years ago, and they're pretty wonderful people that were able to bring in an internationally acclaimed scholar to speak at events like this. We are very grateful to be part of this opportunity. And while Michelle may be introducing our esteemed guest, I wanted to take a moment to comment on her area of research, children's active, healthy, risky outdoor play. As someone who grew up in rural Newfoundland, I'm pretty familiar with risky play. As you can imagine, it was pretty commonplace, and I believe I'm better for it, and all of my friends are better for it. While my community of Lassie, which most of you have not heard of, but you can Google, it's beautiful, didn't have a lot of wealth. It had an incredible environment in which we could play outdoors. As kids, we were resourceful, making do with what we had, and let me just say that many a fort and a castle were built with the underside of a wharf, some pine tree boughs that we may or may not have sawed off ourselves, and which is a little extra risky, and lots of rocks given it's Newfoundland. But my memories of the time are fun, and it did teach us resiliency, creativity, and cooperation. So I really value the work that you're doing. And I think we could all use a lot more of that in our lives, even as adults. So many thanks to all of you for attending. It's great to see this big crowd in August. Clearly the topic is one that's resonating. Thank you for traveling and for being here, and I hope that you all enjoy the presentation. Back to you, Michelle.
I have my trusty notes with me so I don't forget anything in introducing our speaker. Thanks so much, Joanne, for that, and thanks for sharing your own personal connection to the value of this talk today. So before I hand it over to Mariana, I want to provide the audience with a short introduction to her and her work. And I'd also like to encourage everyone to complete our evaluation, which you will find on your tables. So again, through the funding that we were provided, we wanted to do an evaluation of this event and get a feel for the people who came out to hear this presentation today. The evaluation, if you complete it, you will be entered into a draw for a gift card. And also, only those who complete the evaluation will be able to enjoy our food today at our social event. So we will be checking. No, I'm just joking. You can have food, but please, please complete the survey. So Dr. Brussoni, she's an associate professor in both the Department of Pediatrics and the School of Population and Public Health in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia. She's also an investigator at the BC Children's Hospital Research Institute, an academic scientist in the BC Injury Research and Prevention Unit, and a board member of the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada. Trained as a developmental psychologist, she explores child injury prevention and the value of risk-taking during outdoor play to children's health and development. She works closely with our interdisciplinary research team with key stakeholders, knowledge users, and community members to promote children's healthy, active, and risky outdoor play. And she's established international research policy and practice networks to support her program of research representing diverse sectors. So some of the work that she's been involved with, she was funded by the Lawson Foundation along with us with the Lawson Foundation's outdoor play strategy, which resulted in the development of a digital app called outsideplay.ca. And an in-person workshop to reframe parents' risk perceptions with the goal of facilitating children's access to nature-based risky play. She also created outdoorplaybook.ca, which is a design tool for schools, parents, and other early years advocates, which actually won an award, a National Award of Excellence from the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects. She currently leads CHR-funded research, the Playability Study, which is aimed at gaining the perspective of children aged 10 to 13 years and their parents on their use of their neighborhood to play outside. And the ultimate goal of this current research that she's doing is to develop an index of the playability of outdoor environments. There's so much more that I could say, but I promised I would be brief. There's going to be lots of time during our social event to talk to Dr. Brussoni about all the work that she's currently doing. So with that, I will pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Joanne and everybody. I'm really honored to be here and that you've given your evening to come and listen to this talk, especially in August. It's such a pleasure to have spent these few days in Halifax. I have to say that you're all punching above your weight, in terms of the size of this province and what you've been able to accomplish. In no small part, I'm sure, to the excellent people in this room and to Michelle and her team. So just to give you a bit of background before we begin this talk, so I'm going to be talking about risk, resilience, and the renaissance of play. But for those of you who aren't aware, my background is actually in injury prevention. I've been an injury prevention researcher for about 18 years. And this research, you might be a bit confused. What's an injury prevention researcher telling people that their kids are too safe? And what you'll be learning about today is actually a bit about that journey and why I had this realization, and how my research has really changed and shifted because of what I've learned about the importance of risk and risk-taking and risky play. So in terms of kind of briefly what we'll be talking about today, we're going to be covering the why, the what, and the how of outdoor risky play. So what is it? Why is it important? And how do we bring it back? But before we get to all that, it's always important for us to go back to our own favorite childhood memory of play. And Joanne actually started us very nicely today by giving her memory. But I'd really like all of you to take yourself back there to your favorite play memory, the time when you were just feeling like you could do whatever you want and wherever you were. I want you to think about who you were with, what you were doing, the kinds of sounds and smells that you were experiencing. Really take yourself back there. And I want you to tell me how many of you were outside. Just hands up. Okay, so I think almost all of you. And how many of you were taking risks? Okay, all of you. How many of you were supervised? A little, kinda, nah, maybe. So no supervision. So how many of you were in spaces that weren't actually playgrounds? You know, they could have been forests, ditches, ravines, the streets, etc. Okay, pretty much all of you as well. Okay. How many of you think that your parents were bad parents for letting you do what you did? Nobody? Okay. So I've been asking that question across the country, in the world actually, and the responses that I'm getting are very similar. So, I'm intrigued, right? So why outside? What is it about being outside that is so wonderful and so compelling for children? And I actually want to hear from you. What is it that you got out of those experiences that you wanted to be outside? Freedom. What else?
The expanse.
Like just wide open spaces. Yeah, so what did those wide open spaces afford you?
To be far away from my parents.
So away from adult eyes. This is very important, right? And why was it important to be away from adult eyes?
So that my mother wouldn't have to tell me to come in and make my bed.
Getting away from chores, that was a big one for me, actually, yeah. Yeah. And what else? Sensory? Sorry, tell me about the sensory.
Well, I was thinking about I live across the street from the river, so just the swimming in summertime in the river, just floating in the back, and just having
The swimming.
yeah. Water.
So seeing nature, the wind, the sun, the water, yeah, those different senses affecting your body, yeah. What else about being outside? Yeah. Unpredictable. So like always changing, right? Didn't know what you were going to see, who you were going to find, what you were going to do. Yeah. What else? No rules. So you made your own rules, right? You met up with your friends, you kind of decided what you wanted to do, how you wanted to do it. Yeah, absolutely. So why weren't those things available inside? What is it about outside? Why outside?
Outside belongs to everyone.
It's communal space. Anybody, yeah. So I guess what I want to really make you kind of realize in terms of your own experiences is start to realize why outdoor play is different from indoor play. It's not the same thing. And therefore, it will have different impacts on children's health, development, and well-being. So we're going to cover a little bit about that as we go on. But let's talk now about what's childhood like now. Do you think that kids today, maybe your own kids, have similar memories and experiences than the ones that you had in your head? How many think similar? Maybe elements perhaps a little bit? Yeah. Mostly different? Yeah. What's different? What's different? Structure. Supervision. Screens. Yeah. The screens were really boring when I was a kid. There were like 2 channels, and we had to hold the knob between the channels to see them. Yeah. Yeah, what else is different? Parents, yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, so kind of this parenting norm around like supervision, like Christine mentioned, and lots of activities, supervised activities. Yeah, so what the literature is showing is in fact that you're right, that the childhood has changed over time. And what we're seeing is much more indoor, sedentary, screen-based activities. And we're just kind of starting to realize what the effect of that is on kids. So before we get to that, what do you think happened to play? Where did it go? Why aren't kids having those same memories? What happened? The internet, yeah. So compelling screens and internet. What else? Tell me about the fear.
I know so I raised my children there in their mid-20s now, but that was just the start of fear that I children play on outside because if they were taken or one child would be taken. Those kinds of stories seem to abound.
Right.
You have to watch your kids all the time.
So the fear of kidnapping, and I think probably everybody has the name of that kid that was in the news, you know, when like the formative, and the visceral reaction you have as a parent to the idea that your child would get kidnapped.
And I think that somebody mentioned about peer pressure, so
Yeah, so like parenting norms around what it means to be a good parent. So what does it mean to be a good parent now? Like what's more typical? Closer supervision, absolutely, yeah. And some of the other interesting stuff that's happened over time is actually so what happened in the post-war Europe is you had a very affluent society. You could have quite low education levels and still have a very decent life and buy your house and do all of those things. But as recessions hit in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, the inequalities increased. And interestingly, so did parenting norms that mirrored those recessions. So we saw a greater increase in kind of intensive parenting model. And part of what that was parents not wanting their kid to be the one left behind, right? So wanting them to, you know, get into the right schools, get the right jobs, and all of those kinds of things to make sure that they were okay. And so you saw more of that overscheduling, the supervision, the perception of children as vulnerable and in need of kind of catering and care, and this move towards this intensive parenting model. And at the same time, we had fundamental demographic changes. We had increasing urbanization, increasing densification of cities, more high-rises. So you also had, with that, more cars and less social cohesion, less knowing your neighbors, feeling more isolated from other people. And so the sense that there's less kind of, I feel comfortable letting my kid out because I know that there's people around to take care of them if there's an issue. Right? So you have kind of this perfect storm of social forces that came into play kind of all at once that created the situation we're in now. And so now we have to think about untangling that. And it's not about going back to the 40s when mom was at home and the kids were playing outside. It's not about that at all. Those days are over. And there's good reasons for those days to be over. But it's about thinking about how do we adapt to the society we have now and getting kids back out to play. Now, it's kind of interesting because there's lots of different sectors that are calling this a silent play emergency. So there's a sense that we're losing a lot by kids not being able to play. And the Real Play Coalition is quite interesting to me because they're made up of National Geographic, Unilever, Lego, and IKEA. So we have, right? I hear you have an IKEA in town now. So you have 4 very large corporations who are worried about kids' play. So I can understand Lego, right? They sell stuff for play. There's got to be an ulterior motive there. But the others are much less intuitive to me. And so if they're worried about play, that's quite interesting. And I'm going to share with you a little bit later on why I think that's going on for them. So what we've seen over time is a change in children's bodies and minds. So for example, in terms of their body and body composition, there was research that compared the body composition of kids in 1981 and in 2007, 2009. So we have boys and girls, 12 years old. And what they found is the Canadian children are taller, fatter, heavier, rounder, weaker, less flexible, and less aerobically fit than in 1981. And that's worrying a lot of people. The other trend that's been uncovered is a concern around gut microbiomes and actually having kids over-sanitized, too clean, so that they're not getting the kind of gut microbiomes they need to be able to stay healthy. Interestingly, ophthalmologists have gotten concerned too. And they're saying kids need to be outside 3 hours a day, every day, in order to decrease the likelihood of myopia or short-sightedness. We also have some concerning data around creativity. So this is a standardized test, and I know the numbers aren't very clear there, but the take-home message is that there's been a significant decrease in scores of creativity since 1990. So there's a number of kind of patterns that are raising the alarm for people. But one of the most concerning, I think, is that we have 1.2 million Canadian children and youth that are affected by mental illness today. We also have about 26% of Canadian kindergarten children that are developmentally vulnerable on communication skills and general knowledge, emotional maturity, physical health and well-being, social competence, language, and cognitive development. So some very concerning trends that have actually resulted in a number of different disciplines and groups wanting to make change. And the interesting thing is that many of them have ended up and landed on outdoor play. And so I'm going to kind of loop back to why. But I first wanted to tell you about one of those groups, and I was part of this particular coalition. So are you guys familiar with Participation? Yeah? Yeah, so they release the report cards every 2 years on children's physical activity levels in Canada. So in 2015, we partnered with them, and there was 17 national organizations and academics around the table, including myself, to develop a position statement on active outdoor play. And this is what it said. Access to active play in nature and the outdoors with its risks is essential for healthy child development. We recommend increasing children's opportunities for self-directed play outdoors in all settings, at home, at school, in childcare, the community, and nature. And it's a 2-page document, essentially, that goes through, whoops. Did that work again? Oh, yay, I fixed it. That goes through some of the myths around kind of the dangers of outdoor play, and talks about the research on why it's important. And you can see, I mean, they're blurred out, but some of the logos, but it was Parks Canada, Evergreen, Participation, Earth Day Canada, Kid Active, CHEO, etc. So a whole bunch of kind of national organizations from very different sectors. Now, interestingly, a couple of years later, the Council of Chief Medical Officers of Health, so this is all the Chief Medical Officers of Health across the country, as well as the head of the Public Health Agency of Canada, wrote a position statement supporting hours. And you can find it on the internet. The link is here, but I'm also happy to send it to you. And so this is a really interesting and important document, because what it does is it means that public health in Canada recognizes that we have a problem and that we need to make change. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, I would highly encourage you to have a look at it. It's buried in the web, but I can send you the link. So, getting back to the Real Play Coalition, why are they worried? Well, I think it was best put by the London School of Economics director, Minouche Shafik, who said that in the past, jobs were about muscles. Now, they're about brains. But in the future, they'll be about heart. So what she's talking about is socio-emotional learning. And when you think about the kind of play that you experienced when there was no rules and you were out there with your friends figuring out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, that is socio-emotional learning and creativity. Now, before I move on, any questions about any of that? I'm going to move on to risky play specifically. Any questions about any of this that I've covered so far? Okay. Feel free to ask questions at any point in time. So, risky play. And what is risky play? Well, this comes from research done by Ellen Sandseter at Queen Maud University in Norway. And she defines risky play as thrilling and exciting forms of play involving uncertainty and the chance of physical injury. And the quotes you see here, it's thrilling, but I get scared. It's scary, funny at the same time, and it tickles in my tummy. Those are quotes that came from kids, 3 to 4-year-olds that were in her PhD thesis. And probably in the memory that you had in your head, there was a bit of that, you know, this sense of like excitement and pushing yourself. And really, every single part of this definition is important. So it's thrilling and exciting, involves uncertainty. So the point is you don't know what's going to happen. You're running experiments with the world and with yourself. You're not sure how they're going to turn out. And there's a chance of physical injury. It could go wrong. So typically, adults have the biggest issue with the uncertainty. They don't like uncertainty. We want to control everything, especially when it comes to our kids. And that's the sticking point for risky play. So there's 6 different kinds of risky play that Ellen has described. Play at speed, so like running really fast or going down a hill really fast. Play at heights, so climbing trees or other things. Play with dangerous tools, like when you're building forts or chopping wood. Play near dangerous elements like fire or water or cliffs. Rough and tumble play, so like play fighting. And play where there's a chance of getting lost. So where kids are allowed to go around their neighborhood and kind of go off on their own. Or with younger kids where they find little hidey holes where they feel like they're not, you know, they're off in their own little world. Now, risky play looks very, very different for different kids. And so you could have kids who are like the same age, developmental stage, but have different comfort levels and capabilities. And so sometimes it's hard for adults to look at what's going on and think, okay, that's risky play or not. It's not up to us to decide what's risky or not. It's up to us to provide the space for the kids to be able to do that, both physically and mentally, to give them the space that they can explore whatever they want to do. Engage with that uncertainty. Engage with their bodies in the world. So I hope it's become clear, you know, if you think back to your own play memories what the benefits of outdoor risky play have been found to be. So we talked about social-emotional learning, cognition. So when you were making plans, figuring out how you're going to do that particular goal, you were building your executive functioning skills. These are really fundamental to your success later in life. Physical. So you talked about the expanse of the outdoors, right? So what does that allow? It allows you to move more. And kids are more physically active. They move bigger when they're outside than when they're in, right? When you're in, you kind of feel a bit more hemmed in. So that's really important for gross and fine motor development, physical literacy, and so on, as well as physical activity. And then mental health. So when our kids were younger, my husband's here tonight anyway. When our kids were younger, they're 11 and 12 now, but when they were younger, I used to go to the playgrounds a lot. And one of the things that I kind of had a little, just kind of to amuse myself as I was passing the time on the playground, was the number of times I heard, "No, stop, get down, be careful." You remember that, right? Anybody who's spent any time you're still spending time on the playground, so yeah. You hear it all the time, right? So imagine you're that child hearing that. What are you listening? What are you hearing? What is it telling you? Sorry? You're not capable. Yeah. What else is it telling you? Sorry? There's danger, yeah. So you don't believe in me. The world is too dangerous. I need you to help me figure out how to navigate this world. So is that great for kids' mental health? So if we want them to get a sense that we trust them, that we have confidence in them, that they're capable and competent, then we need to let them have those experiences. So I think it's summed up quite nicely to say that play is the engine of optimal child development. And so the reference here is a new chapter we have on the Encyclopedia on Early Childhood Development on outdoor play. And it includes 9 chapters, 9 papers that summarize the literature if you want to go and have a look. Now, the other important thing that's come out is the importance of access to nature, right? So you talked about the senses, right? But it's also being out in nature, and we're finding out more and more about how much nature provides for our health and well-being. And so the change and challenge you talked about, kind of it changing all the time. You never know what you're going to find. So with different seasons, it's changing, it provides different challenges. But there's also a stress buffering and attention restoration effect of nature. And probably you can all relate to kind of the sense of you've had a rough day, you're exhausted. You take a walk, you spend some time in nature, and you feel like, you just feel refreshed. You feel like you can handle it. You've been able to do some self-regulation. The other important part of nature is that it's been found that children's nature experiences are very important in terms of their own sense of their environmental attitudes. So being out in nature, recognizing the importance of nature, also makes children more aware of the importance of sustainability and why we want to keep nature going. Any questions about any of that? Oh, okay. So we talked a bit about why play went away, but one of the things that I deal with as an injury prevention researcher is fear and anxiety. And I look at the statistics. So what is it that we're so afraid of? What are the big worries? One was mentioned already. What was it? Remember? Kidnapping. Huge, huge, huge worry. What's another one?
Falls.
Sorry?
Falls.
Falls? Yeah. Like major injury, yeah. But there's an injury mechanism, like when, let's say, go out and play, the parents are really worried about, say, their kids being out on the street or whatever. What other people think, and cars, yeah, so cars, and then these are the top three: strangers, cars, and what other people think. Absolutely. So I just want to actually give you some stats. Are those reasonable fears? So the risk of abduction by a stranger in Canada, because they're not worried about the people they know, they're worried about the white van man, is 1 in 14 million. That's the same as a Lotto 649 ticket. If maybe you play, your likelihood is 1 in 14 million.
How many children are there?
There's about 7 million children. So it's like one kid every 2 years. Yeah. And in fact, the statistics are so low, they don't keep statistics, I guess. If, like this number is too volatile because it just doesn't happen very often. But to give you a sense, if we were to take this number, you'd have to leave your child unattended for about 200,000 years for them to get kidnapped by a stranger. Right. So hopefully it's clear that it doesn't happen. And the kind of restrictive parenting that fear has brought about is not justified by the reality of the situation. Okay, so parents are also very worried about injuries. So this is the deaths from injury for kids 0 to 19 years from 1950 to 2009. So these 0 to 19-year-olds. So what do you notice here in this graph? What do you notice? Going down, big decrease, right? So it's never been safer to be a child than it is right now in Canada. Okay, so what's driving this trend? Sorry? The overprotection is working, right? It could be. It could be. But yeah. Yeah. So what happened around this time? Between 1970 and 1975, what happened? Seatbelts. Yeah. So seatbelts were required in cars in, I think, 1973. The first seatbelt law was passed in Ontario in 1976, I think it was. And the last seatbelt law was passed in Alberta in 1990. We're from Alberta, so I feel okay slagging Alberta. But what you see in terms of these trends are really car safety trends. And it's not pedestrians, it's kids in cars. Now, the leading cause of death for kids in 1950 was cars. What's the leading cause of death now, today? Any guesses? No, you don't know? You hung out at the injury unit, you don't know? Nobody can guess? Still cars. Yeah, still cars. The leading cause of death for kids in Canada is still cars. It's kids in cars, not as pedestrians. And so the ironic thing is that parents are driving their kids around thinking that they're keeping them safe when it's actually the most dangerous thing that they can do. Yeah. Any thoughts or questions about any of this? Yeah. Not with their parents, but because we never get data that detailed, right? So in terms of cycling injury, part of the challenge is we don't have exposure data, right? So in terms of the number of pedestrian injuries versus car injury deaths, it's an 8 to 1. So for 8 kids that die in cars, 1 will die as a pedestrian. But what you don't know is how much time are they spending in cars or as a pedestrian, right? And we don't have good data on that. So getting hit by a car as a child is incredibly lethal, especially above 30 kilometers per hour. Absolutely. But the solution is not putting kids in cars. Yeah. Any other questions about? No? Okay. So we don't have, as I just said, we don't have great data because they're not coded, unfortunately, for how I want them coded. They're coded for how administrators want them coded. So about the only kind of codes that I can look at for play-related injuries in the outdoors are deaths from play equipment and deaths from falls from trees. So I was able to find Canada-wide stats for 2007 to 2013 for falls from play equipment, and 2000 to 2013 for falls from trees. This is ages 1 to 14. So we have 7 million kids in Canada. This is 7 years of data. So it represents 49 million children. How many deaths from play equipment do you think there was across those 7 years? And those of you who were in my presentation yesterday, shut up. So any guesses? 10? 10? Okay. More? Anybody want to go higher? Lower? Okay, we'll go with 10. How about, okay, this is 14 years of data, so it's 49 or 98 million children. Okay, 98 million children. How many deaths? 4? Okay, 98 million children, and you think only 4 died? Maybe 9? Okay, all right. Children don't die from play. They really don't. It's incredibly, incredibly rare. So as an injury epidemiologist, which is part of what we do, this is not on the radar. It should not be on the radar. Now, what about kids ending up in hospitals or medically treated? Well, we don't have great data coded for that, but we do have a systematic review that was done that looked at medically treated injuries. So a systematic review looks across the literature, right? So all the studies that actually looked at the time kids spent doing an activity and whether they got a medically treated injury or not. And so they looked at active commuting, which is like walking or biking to school, sports participation, and play. And this was for ages 6 to 12 years. And medically treated injury, what the definition of that varied greatly by the included literature. So it could be as minor as going to the nurse's office for an ice pack, or having to actually go to hospital, say for treatment for sutures or a broken arm or something like that. So any guesses on which one had the most number of injuries of the three? Sports? Is that sports? Okay, what about when you controlled for the time spent doing the activity? Which one had the most? Any guesses? What's that? Leisure time? All right, the big reveal. So, in terms of the number, it was play. The highest number of injuries, play. But when you controlled for the time spent doing the activity, it was sports. Play had the lowest number, or the lowest time, like the lowest rate of medically treated injuries. And this rate of 0.15 to 0.17 per 1,000 hours, that translates to needing to play 3 hours a day for about 10 years to log enough time to get one medically treated injury that's likely to be minor. So I guess what I'm trying to get across is in terms of the injury statistics, they really don't support this incredible fear we have about something really bad happening to our kids. And the other thing that I point out to my public health and injury prevention colleagues is that, in fact, engaging in risk is part of learning risk management skills so that they can keep themselves safe in different situations. So keeping kids safe actually means letting them take risks. So how do we bring back play? We talked about all these societal forces that just sometimes they just seem overwhelming. And sometimes I feel like this little kid at the bottom of a long stair, just kind of, oh my God, exhausted. But how do you get anywhere? You just put your foot on the first step and you go up. And that's what we've been doing for the last few years, not just me, people in this room, people across the country. And the amazing thing is we've made incredible progress, more progress than I thought possible. And one of the things that I find the most encouraging is the fact that kids want more play. So for example, there was this UNICEF Canada report that asked kids, what's it like to grow up in Canada and how can we make it better? And when they talked about the favorite thing about being a kid in Canada, playing outside, right? They want to play outside. So what do outdoor risky play supportive environments look like? Well, there's 3 elements that are included: time, space, and freedom. Those are the 3 key ingredients of risky play supportive environments. And so for time, it's not having overscheduled lives, it's being able to go out and just play. For space, it's having high quality space to be able to engage in this kind of play. And that, it doesn't take much. So some of the activities that Michelle and her group are doing around putting loose parts on playgrounds, that can dramatically increase the quality of the play. The freedom, I think, is the hardest nut to crack because we are the problem. It's the adults and our fears and anxiety that are the problem here. And so we're doing research in each of these areas trying to move the agenda forward. But there's really been some quite exciting movements internationally as well as nationally that I think are showing a time for change, that we've reached a tipping point. I really love this quote by the former mayor of Bogota, which said, "Children are a kind of indicator species. If we can build a successful city for children, we will have a successful city for all people." And he said this quote quite a few years ago, but since then, there's actually been a pickup by international organizations that have really pushed the idea of designing child-friendly cities for kids. So they're not only playing in playgrounds, they can play anywhere and they can access anywhere. And so, for example, we have the UNICEF Shaping Urbanization for Children Handbook on Child-Responsive Urban Planning. We have the National Association of City Transportation Officials Streets for Kids Design Initiative. And we have so many more I could have put up, including in Canada, the city of Calgary talking about the importance of partnering with children for city planning. There's also been some incredible media around this issue, and I'll just show you just a small portion of that. So you had Time magazine cover this a few years ago, the Wall Street Journal, the Star, Maclean's magazine, the Atlantic, the Guardian newspaper, and even health publications and education publications. And more recently, woohoo! So it's getting a lot of press in the media, which is incredible and fantastic. There seems to be an appetite to talk about this. And in fact, in January, The Nature of Things released a documentary. Did you get to see it? Yeah. Called The Power of Play. Awesome document, not just because I was in it. Shameless self-promotion. So it was a great documentary because they covered the importance of play and risk-taking, even for animals. And they talked about children as part of that too. We see education wanting to change. So the International School Ground Alliance last year, 2017, put out this manifesto on risk in play and learning, and talking about how essential risk-taking opportunities are for well-functioning school grounds, and that adults and institutions have a responsibility to use common sense in providing and allowing risk-taking activities for children and young people. It's a very interesting manifesto if you want to have a look at it. We also have cities who are changing the way that they approach things. This is from my own backyard in Richmond. And we have the courts that are pushing back. There was a BC Supreme Court case in 2015 that was thrown out. The judge cited our position statement, and he said, risk-taking is encouraged within reasonable limits on the basis that children who never hazard a chance are unlikely to develop properly, either physically or emotionally. So we have the legal system also recognizing this importance. In Canada, Michelle mentioned the Lawson Foundation. They've been really critical to moving things along, providing funding. These were 16 projects that they funded across the country in different sectors, of which Michelle's project was one and I had another. And that's really created a vibrant cohort of people across the country that are propelling forward this issue in very interesting ways and across different sectors. This was yesterday, that's the mayor, and Dr. Rob Strang, your Chief Medical Officer of Health, hanging out with us at a playground. And so Michelle's team has really done amazing things here. If you haven't checked out their website, Play Outside Nova Scotia, it's really incredible what you guys have accomplished. And there's been a kind of a groundswell support for uniting these different sectors, because it's such an interesting issue because there's so many sectors, all from different angles, coming together at once. And so we've created Outdoor Play Canada. And if you haven't joined yet, please do. It's free. It won't be free for long, so get in now. It's basically just a group of people that want to share with each other. This website is going to change in September. It will have a lot more resources listed, so it'll be like a one-stop shop where you can find the stuff I mentioned here as well as many others in one place. There's so many tools out there. We have the first ever summit on outdoor play coming in September 27th to 29th in the Ottawa Forest and Nature School in Wesley Clover Park's campground. You can camp. We'll be outside all day long. But what's been really, really exciting is to see the passion that has propelled this forward and that has permitted so much movement to be made in such a short amount of time. And I'm convinced that we can change the tide and make it so that it is more able and palatable for kids to be outside and to be able to take risks and play in the way that they want to play. So just to summarize, what we've covered is why play is important for kids, why play is important for all of us, and why each of us, is important for play and have our own role in changing the situation. So please reach out. This is my contact information. If there's anything you saw in this presentation that you would like, I'm happy to provide it and more. And it's actually very helpful for me to hear from those of you who are interested, so I understand whether our research is actually providing useful material for you in your work. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Michelle.